Okay, so let's get started. Thank you for Xavier to hosting this event. I'm sure it's just the beginning. Today I will be talking about Apache NiFi, and in particular about the flow development lifecycle. So a quick introduction about myself. I'm Pierre Villard. I'm solution architect at HortonWorks for about 2 years now. And I'm involved in the Apache NiFi project for 2 years and a half. And now I'm a committer and PMC member for this project. You can follow me on Twitter and check also my website. It's mainly articles about NiFi. And what I'm going to discuss today has been extensively described on my last article, because we are tight on schedule today, so I won't be able to present everything as much as would like. Also, I've been asked to present Apache NiFi, so just a quick question, how many of you already used NiFi? Yeah, so not that much. Okay, so I will do a quick presentation about NiFi, all the sub-projects into the NiFi ecosystem, the use cases I see in the field, and then I will be talking about the NiFi registry and how you can deploy your workflow across multiple environments. Okay, so something I quite often hear is that NiFi is a new project, but people are always forgetting that the project has been initiated by the NSA 12 years ago, so it has been extensively used for a long time now. The NSA gave the project to the Apache Software Foundation in 2014, and the project reached the ASF top-level project status in 2050. So it's a sign that the community behind the project is strong enough to provide a high-quality project. If you have any question about the Apache Software Foundation and the Apache project, how it works, and so on, feel free to reach out to me just after this talk. I will be happy to answer any question you may have. So what was the main idea initially for NiFi? It's like a big toolbox that provides you a lot of tools to collect and move the data from A to B in a secure way, and to allow you to perform any kind of transformation you want while the data is moving from source to destination. So I won't go into the details because I don't have the details, but I let you imagine what for this project was used at the NSA, what kind of data there was moving at the NSA, phone calls, text messages, emails, and so on. I think Snowden gave us a good idea of what they were doing with that. So now for the enterprises using NiFi, that's the kind of architecture we are seeing. So you are using NiFi or MiNiFi agents. I will be talking about the agents a bit later, directly on the source where the data is produced. And then you are moving the data all the way along to your main data centers, where you want to actually store your data into any kind of big data systems or databases, whatever you want. And the idea is to provide a way to actually do that very securely and efficiently. So you need to look at NiFi as the single way to actually collect the data and send it to your final destination. So if you are using the HortonWorks products, that's the kind of deployment you will see in the field. So you will use NiFi to collect any kind of data, and then feed this data into publish-subscribe kind of mechanism like Kafka we talked about in the talk before, or streaming engines like Storm or Spark. And then you send the data to classical technologies for long-term archiving and more, let's say, batch-oriented or databases like Elasticsearch and so on to actually request the data. In the NiFi ecosystem, we now have quite a lot of projects. So here is the exhaustive list as of today. So we have NiFi. I won't go into much details about that. And then we have the MiNiFi agents. So that's what I was talking about. So the idea behind the agent is to provide a low-weight version of NiFi to directly run directly on the remote devices and collect the data and actually already perform transformations on the data directly on the edge. So we have the Java version and we have the C++ version, which is really designed for all the IoT use cases. And if you want to actually run TensorFlow or deep learning neural networks directly on the edge and only collect some labeling data or this kind of stuff, entities and so on. So right now in the community we have a lot of development going on the C++ version around deep learning, machine learning, and so on. Then the NiFi registry is pretty new. We released the first version a few months ago. So it's mainly for the enterprises having a lot of different environments. So if you have a NiFi for development, NiFi for integration, and NiFi in production, that's what you will use to actually move your workflows between the environments. So it's more for, let's say, a DevOps approach of NiFi workflows. Then we have the NiFi C2 server, which is used to actually manage thousands of agents. Because if you are deploying, I don't know, let's say a C++ version of the NiFi agents on mobile phones, you want a way to actually manage the configuration and what kind of workflow is running on the edge. So you will use a NiFi C2 server to actually propagate configuration changes and workflow changes on all the agents. And finally, the last one, which is new for 2 weeks ago or something like that, which is a NiFi Fluid Design System, which is going to be renamed into NiFi Flow Design System due to legal issues, because with Apache license, it's kind of hard to be on the right side of the law. So it's more a project to provide to anyone all the UI UX elements of NiFi if you want to use that for your own projects. So NiFi features. So that's the UI of NiFi. So it's a web-based UI. So if you run NiFi, it's starting a JT web server, and you can access the UI where you can actually start developing your own workflow. Just a small message, there is a Docker container available, so if you want to try out NiFi, it's really easy. You just Docker check out the image, Docker run, and you will be able to access the UI and play with it if you want to give it a try. The interest of the NiFi UI is to actually provide real-time feedbacks on what's going on, and also to provide a way to actually manage your workflow in real time. If you want to do modifications, update your parameters, you can do it live on your workflow without any interruption service. Then one of the very important features of NiFi is we don't care about the data. So it can be small, it can be big, any kind of format, binary, CSV, Avro, JSON, whatever you want, sound files, video, images, we don't care. And you can address both batch and streaming use cases. So that's one of the important things you need to know about it. Then we have the provenance metadata, which is let's say, very important lately with the GDPR regulations and so on. I'm sure you are all ready for that. Yeah, okay, not sure. So it will be really useful because it's providing all the information regarding how you access the data, how you modified it, and it will give you the possibility to actually build the full lineage of how you played with your data since the collection to the destination. Also, NiFi is integrating with Apache Atlas, which is another Apache project. So if you are actually using NiFi to send your data into a Hadoop cluster, with the integration between NiFi and Atlas, you will be able to have the full lineage with NiFi, but also what you are doing with the data on Hadoop with Hive, Spark, and so on. Well, I don't need to go into the details, but since it has been built by the NSA, the security is one of the most important things for NiFi. So we have dedicated people at HortonWorks only focusing on the security, because that's what we want. Sometimes when you need to move data from A to B, you have security constraints, but the technology you are playing with are very difficult to use to provide a sufficient level of security. So NiFi will provide you easy ways to actually move the data in a secure way. And finally, as I said, NiFi is a toolbox, so it's providing a lot of tools. You will see it in the next slide. But sometimes for very specific use case or very specific business requirements, maybe you won't be able to address your use case with the out-of-the-box tools. So NiFi is also a framework. If you want to put your hands in the code and develop your own tools, it's providing a very easy-to-use framework, and you can build your own components in NiFi. So right now, we have about 250 processors. So it can be a bit surprising to have so much processors, but the idea behind this is to have very simple processors performing very simple tasks, but doing it very efficiently, because as I said, we are doing both batch and streaming. And when we are doing streaming, we want low latency workflows. So we are developing processors to do simple tasks, but very efficiently. Honestly, if you are going to get started with NiFi, you should be able to answer any use case you have with the processors available with NiFi. If not, as I said, you can develop your own quite easily. Common use cases I see as an architect at HortonWorks. So it's just a non-exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea of what I can see on the field. So one of the use cases we see a lot for customers is to optimize Splunk. For some reasons, Splunk is expensing on the storage, so maybe you don't want to send all of your data into Splunk. So sometimes people are using NiFi to actually modify and pre-filter the data before sending it to Splunk. One of the most important use cases we see lately in the field is around cybersecurity. If you heard about the Apache Metron project, you will probably want to use NiFi in combination with Metron to actually build the platform for cybersecurity. Then I already said it, but you can use NiFi to feed data into streaming analytics engine. Storm, Spark, Flink, Beam, whatever kind of streaming engines you want to use. Another use case is data warehouse offload. So if you have databases you want to collect from and to push the data into Hadoop because it's too expensive, I'm thinking about Oracle, Teradata, or stuff like that, you can use NiFi to actually collect the data on the fly. It's not a pure CDC solution, but you can do something, let's say, easy CDC approach to actually offload the data from the data warehouse into Hive or HBase or Elasticsearch or whatever you want. More simply, you can just use NiFi to move the data. Sometimes you have multiple data centers. You want to move your data from one place to another. NiFi is done for that. Then, as I said, IoT is very trendy lately. So with the NiFi C++ agent, you can do quite a lot of things in the IoT. We are working with a lot of companies for self-driving cars and so on, where they are using NiFi C++ agent in the cars to actually collect the data and already perform transformation on the data while the data is still in the car. And then NiFi is providing a lot of tools to ingest the data into your Hadoop cluster. A slide I always want to show because it's always confusing for people, and I always hear some things I don't like, because people want to replace existing tools with NiFi, and you shouldn't do it unless you have very carefully think about your use cases. So NiFi is in the middle of multiple existing tools, and it really depends on the use case you want to address if you want to use NiFi. But for example, some customers are asking, why should I have NiFi and Kafka? It's two completely different things, and you will want to use both. You want to use NiFi and you want to use Kafka. So yeah, I won't go into the details of this slide, but if you have questions regarding the positioning of NiFi, feel free to ask me, detail your use cases, and I will tell you if it can be a replacement or not. Something I hear quite a lot is also to replace Informatica or Talent with NiFi. Again, you can do it, but it depends on your use cases. You could have surprised if you do it with use cases not designed for NiFi. So feel free to ask questions at the end or catch me after the talk, and we can discuss this part. OK, so now presentation is over. So I assume you know NiFi. I'm sorry for people that do not know NiFi, but I was supposed to give a technical talk, so from now on, I'm assuming you know NiFi, and then I will be talking about the NiFi registry component and how it's going to ease your life. So if you are not using the NiFi registry yet, do it, because if you are not, that means that you are doing one of the two options here, and your life is probably a nightmare, so you want to use a NiFi registry. So what's the issue? What was the issue before NiFi registry came out? So as I said, most organizations, most companies have multiple clusters, development, integration, production, and you want to actually deploy your workflows that you have developed from one environment to another. So just DevOps, classical DevOps model. So before the NiFi registry, you had two options. Just copy-paste the flow.xml.gz file from one environment to another. It's a very bad idea. You don't want to do that, but some customers did. So that means that you are actually copying all the content of one environment to another. So it's not, you are not going to move one single workflow, one single use case from one environment to another. You are going to move everything from one environment to another. So you don't want to do that. And besides, you need to restart NiFi, so service interruption, and so on and so on. And then, what most people used was the templates, and who already used templates in the room? OK, not so much. So yeah, templates are not great. We completely recon that because when you are moving one template to another, so a template is an export of an existing workflow as an XML file, and you are moving the XML file from one place to another, and you import the workflow into the destination, the target environment. The issue with this approach is that you need to stop your full workflow, import the new version of your workflow with the template, and start again the workflow. So interruption service, and if you want to roll back because there is some issue with the new version, it's not easy. So that's why we developed in the community the NiFi registry, which is a sub-project of Apache NiFi. So if you want to contribute, you have some links to check out the code and see the existing JIRAs. If you want to look at the roadmap and see where we are going with that. So right now, the NiFi registry, you must see it as, let's say, a place where you are going to store shared resources between multiple NiFi environments. Right now, the only shared resources we are dealing with are workflows, but in the roadmap for the next versions, we want to also provide a way to store custom components. So if you are developing custom processors for your specific use cases, you know that you need to deploy kind of jar files on the environments, and you need to restart NiFi when you deploy a new custom processor. In the roadmap and in the next version, you will be able to publish, just like a Docker image, you will be able to publish your custom processors on the NiFi registry and to actually deploy the custom processors on the target environments without restarting NiFi. So it's not here yet, but it should be in the future in a few months. So right now, it's only for workflows. So if you are on the NiFi UI, you have a workflow, and you want to start versioning it. So you want to actually save your workflow in the NiFi registry. You just right-click on a process group, and you have a new option in the menu, and you can start version control. So for workflows, you need to see the NiFi registry a bit like a Git backend, a Git repository, where you can actually store your workflows and commit new versions with your changes and so on. And the NiFi registry will provide a way to actually upgrade, downgrade your workflow to one version or to another without service interruption, unless you did modifications on your workflows that require a service interruption. I will show you with a quick demo if we are not too tight on the schedule. The next issue we had so far was the externalization of parameters, because if you are developing a workflow in development, you probably won't use the same parameters in production. So I don't know, let's say you are receiving some data using syslog protocol and you want to send this data into Kafka. So if you are developing this workflow into your development cluster, you will give the information about your Kafka brokers for the development cluster. And then when you are deploying the workflow in the production environment, you want to actually change the value for the Kafka brokers, because obviously it's not the same Kafka cluster. So before the NiFi registry, you had to use externalized properties. So either set the variables at the JVM level, or use a properties file that you can reference into the configuration file. Issue with that is each time you need to add a new parameter or change a value, you needed to restart NiFi. And we don't want to restart NiFi because it means service interruption, and we don't want that. So now, in the UI, you can actually set your variables directly from the UI. And what is also nice is you can define your variables directly at a process group level. So it's really interesting if you have multiple projects using the same NiFi cluster. Maybe some projects are allowed to use some variables and some other projects are not. So you can actually give access to some variables to specific projects to be sure that they are not using the same information. Something we can think of is key tabs. You don't want the project A to use a key tab from project B, because otherwise it's going to be an issue. So you can use that to ensure authorizations and multi-tenancy. And also, you can do any modifications you want on the variables. It won't require a NiFi restart. And also the nice thing is that NiFi will automatically detect which component is referencing a variable. And if you are changing the value, it will automatically restart the associated components for you. Again, I will show you if we have time. Some words around the NiFi registry. So in the NiFi registry, we have the notion of buckets. So I don't know, let's say a bucket is kind of a GitHub repository, so you can have multiple repositories. And in the bucket, it's a logical place where you will store your shared resources. And as I said, right now, the only type of shared resources we have is the workflows. So in a bucket, you will define as many workflows you want. And for each workflow, you will have a list of snapshots. So let's say versions. I prefer the word versions. So if you are doing some changes on your workflow in the UI, you will be able to commit the new version to the NiFi registry, and you will have the history of your changes into the NiFi registry. Just remember that right now, if you want to version a workflow, what we are actually versioning in the NiFi registry is a process group. So a workflow always need to be encapsulated into a process group, because that's the component we are going to store in the NiFi registry. Regarding security, so we have actually the same security features as in NiFi, except we don't have the implementation with Apache Ranger project yet, neither OpenID Connect and Knox. It's on the roadmap, so it's coming really soon in the next versions, but that's the only pieces missing right now. So for the authentication, you can do exactly the same as NiFi, so client certificates to authenticate, LDAP or Active Directory, and Kerberos for authentication. Authorizations, you can define your own authorization model directly in the NiFi registry UI. and it will rely, if you are using an Active Directory or LDAP, it will rely on that if you want to define policies based on groups or so on. Okay, so now something you need to think about if you are going to deploy the NiFi registry when you go back to work is, do I want one single NiFi registry which will be used by all my environments? Or I can't do that because my security team is going to say, no way you can access the same NiFi registry from production and development. No way you can do that. And in this case, we will go in scenario 2. So scenario 1 is the easiest, but as I said, you probably won't be able to do that because of the security requirements of your company. But the idea here is to have one single NiFi registry instance, which is reachable from all the environments. And when you are developing a workflow, you will create your workflow, start version control, and save new versions while you are developing your workflow and making updates. This information will be stored in the NiFi registry, and then the other environments are pulling the information, checking out the information from NiFi registry to actually deploy the new versions of your workflow. As I said, it's easier, but you won't do it, most probably. So the other scenario is to have one NiFi registry for each environment. So for network security, it's better. So you will have a NiFi registry instance running along each NiFi cluster. So you will have a NiFi registry instance in development cluster. You will start versioning your workflow, doing updates on your workflow, store new versions, and save this information into the NiFi registry. Then you will have to use some tools to actually export the data from the NiFi registry as files and move the files to the NiFi registry instance of the staging environment. Once this data is imported into the NiFi registry, it's the same. You can go on the NiFi UI of the staging environment and pull out the version you want. And then you are doing the same. So we are providing a lot of tools to ease the process. And actually, the NiFi registry, the second version of the NiFi registry is going to be released next week. I think we are going to start a vote tomorrow or Friday. NiFi registry 0.2 should be released next week. And actually, in the next version of NiFi registry, we provide some kind of hook parameters to actually trigger actions as soon as you have a new version which is committed into the NiFi registry. So the idea behind that is, okay, so you have your developer guy, he committed a new version into the NiFi registry. So you receive an event for that, and you want to actually automatically deploy this new version to the staging and actually run some tests with Jenkins or this kind of stuff, or actually deploy a NiFi instance into a Docker image and check out the workflow, do some integration testing, and if everything is checking out, also, you will get a new event, and you will be able to actually deploy automatically the new version of the workflow into the production environment. So in the next version, the hook mechanism we are providing should give you the opportunity to create a fully automatic pipeline for your deployments. So you probably don't see anything on this slide, but just to give you an idea, you probably don't want to have actually the same version numbers between the multiple NiFi registry instances. So I explain myself. Let's say you are a developer, you are developing a workflow, and you actually just want to save your work in the NiFi registry because you don't want to lose it for some reason. I don't know, a colleague is doing a delete on your workflow, and crap, you lost everything. So you want to actually store your version while you are developing your workflow, but maybe your workflow is not ready yet to actually go in staging or production. So this way, and with the hook mechanism I was talking about, you can actually define when a workflow is good enough to go to the next stage. And this way, you can actually export, import workflows between environments only if you really want to. So let's say you are developing a workflow. The first version is just, as I said, something temporary because you are working on it, but you are not done with it. And then you are committing a second version, which is good to go. You want to actually run integration testing on it. So you will use the hook mechanism to perform the automatic deployment of this version of the workflow into the staging registry. And in the staging registry, it will be the first version, because that's the first workflow, the first version of the workflow you are deploying into this environment. So once the version is in the staging registry, you are automatically pulling the version into your NiFi instance. You are running your integration tests. And you realize, yeah, something is not good. Maybe you forgot some parameters. Maybe you don't have security enabled in development, and you have security enabled in staging, and so it's not working because Kerberos, blah, 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 and so on. So this workflow, this version, is not OK to go in production. So you are creating a JIRA to your developer guy and saying, it's not working. So please check the issue, and please provide a new version. And then your developer is doing some changes, committing changes. You have a third version in the development environment. So it's going to be exported automatically into the staging environment. Again, you can run Docker instances to actually integration test your workflow. And this time, if all the unit testing and integration testing are working, you actually want to automatically deploy it in production. Again, you can use a hook mechanism to do that. So besides the hook mechanism, you will have to use some tools to perform the export-import between the multiple NiFi registry instances. So you have 3 options, but I only listed 2 because the first one is probably something you don't want to do. So with NiFi, everything you are doing through the UI can be done using the REST APIs. Every single action you are doing in the NiFi UI can be done in a scripted way, if you have a lot of time. But to ease your life, we are providing 2 tools. The first one is provided by the community. It's delivered with what we call the NiFi toolkit, which is part of the release process. So if you are checking out NiFi 1.6, you will have the NiFi toolkit. And you have a NiFi CLI, which is developed to actually provide easy way to perform interactions with NiFi and the NiFi registry. And then we have a guy at HortonWorks who is working on a Python client to do the same using the Swagger definition of the REST APIs. So if you are more a Python guy, you can check out this project and do your own changes if something is not available and you need to. OK, so I should be able to do a very quick demo. Again, everything I talked about right now is extensively described on my blog. So I know it's a bit, I mean, a lot of information in a very short time. So if you want to have a look on my website, you will have a full description of what I've been talking about. And I'm actually giving examples with the CLI and the Python library, so you can use the one you prefer. OK, let me. So that's the article I'm talking about. So I think you have about 1 hour to lose if you are reading the article. But if you are interested, you can just check it. So very quickly, so this is a NiFi UI, and I'm just running a very simple demonstration. It's very basic stuff. So in this case, I'm creating a workflow which is simulating temperature sensors running on the edges. So actually, I'm just generating CSV data in this file. So if we have a quick look, so let's say I have sensors running on remote devices, and I'm just generating random data where I have a latitude, longitude, and temperature value, and time. So I'm generating this data and sending this information using TCP. OK, so that's the generation part. OK, I will run this part. All good. It's complaining because I don't have a listener right now. And here on the receiving side, so I'm going to start my listener, which is listening on a specific TCP port, and I will start receiving the data here. So I'm doing two things here. So when I receive the CSV data, I want to actually transform it in the fly. So I want to transform the data from CSV to JSON using schema registry. So at the talk before, we talked about the Confluent schema registry. So if you are already using the Confluent schema registry, you can also use it with NiFi. We can rely on this schema registry. You can also use the one built directly into NiFi, or you can use the HortonWorks one, whichever you prefer. So if I show you what kind of data we are receiving here, So that's the kind of data we are receiving. So maybe I can just... So that's the information I'm receiving from my simulator generating random data. So I have informations I'm receiving, and I'm converting this information directly into JSON. And then I want to do something very simple. I want to run SQL queries, a bit like KSQL, but not exactly the same. I want to execute some queries, some SQL queries on my data. So in this case, in opposition to the Kafka presentation we had before, in this case, we are using Apache Calcite project. So all the queries you can run here are a SQL grammar from the Apache Calcite project. So here, I'm just saying I want to keep only the data where the temperature is between -20 and 40. So I'm actually running SQL queries on my data, and I can start this, and then I'm just sending this information directly into a Postgres database, which is running in a Docker instance. So I had no information before, and now I'm receiving the data, and hopefully the data I'm receiving is only between -20 and 40. So very quickly, how the NiFi registry is going to play with that. So the first thing you will want to do is to actually define where is located your registry client. So if you are checking out the last version of NiFi, you now have a new tab into the controller settings where you can actually define where your NiFi registry is running. So right now it's running in a Docker instance. You can also run the NiFi registry in a Docker image if you want. And then if I want to start versioning a specific process group, a specific workflow, I can do it. But if you remember, the first thing you need to do is to actually create a bucket. So that's the NiFi registry UI. Yeah. And here I have the existing buckets I have already for some other talks and demos. So I will use one of those. So if I want to say this is my workflow where I'm receiving the data and sending the data to Postgres, so that's my first version. That's the version I want to save and deploy later on. I can do version and start version control. Here I have a connection to the NiFi registry, and I'm asked to say which bucket I want to use to actually store my workflow. So I can say, okay, I'm going to store this specific workflow into the test on this bucket. So you should see a bucket like a place dedicated for each project using NiFi. So here, receiving TCP data to Postgres, and blah, and save. So now I have, you can see that my workflow is in sync with what I have in the NiFi registry. So if I go in the NiFi registry here, and I go in the, here, I have the information about my workflow, and I see I have only one version that was committed a few seconds ago. And then if I'm doing a modification on the workflow, so let's say, I don't know, here I tried to send the data to Kafka, but let's say finally I don't want to send the data to Kafka, so I can remove this information. Okay, so now Okay, destination. Okay, sorry. So now I remove this part of the workflow because I realized that I don't want to send the information to Kafka, so let's skip it. So now my workflow changed. I can see that I have local changes that I did locally on my laptop, and I want to commit the new version. So you can actually see the change you did. So in this case, I removed my processor to publish the information to Kafka 1. And I want to commit this new version, so I will just version, commit local changes, remove Kafka, okay, save, and now if I go in the NiFi registry and refresh that, I will have the new version of my workflow here. And now, if I want to deploy a specific version of a workflow, so I will do it on the same NiFi, but just imagine I'm on another NiFi instance. I just drag and drop a process group, and I have a new button available here, which lets me import a workflow. So I have access to the NiFi registry. So in this case, I want to my bucket test NiFi API, my workflow, no, I want this one. And I'm able to choose which version I want to check out on my NiFi and get running. So in this case, I want the last version. And now I have the last version of my workflow ready to be started and process the data. Okay, I won't have time to actually show you externalization of variables and so on because we are tight on schedule, and I don't want to take too much time, and I want to answer any question you may have. So if you have questions, go ahead. I will just show the slides. Okay, that's it. Q&A. Aha.
I'm sorry, it's not about the registry, it's plain NiFi. We have an issue regarding the query database table processor that does not chunks the data into flow file, even though it's parametered. We read things about the fact it would be corrected. Do you know if it's already been corrected, or if it's just...
Okay, you are talking about a very specific stuff. Can we check this just after, because I can check in the JIRAs if it's solved or not. Honestly, the processors I'm mainly working as a committer are not the database ones, so I will check it with you if you want, but I honestly don't know right now. So, no, it's fine, but we can check later.
You spoke about deploying manually, but isn't there any API just?
Yeah, so that's what I said. So everything I'm doing manually can be done in a scripted way, because everything you can do in the UI can be scripted. So you have two options: using the REST APIs or use the clients I talked about, which provides a higher abstraction to take care of all the security authentication and authorizations for you. But if you want to do it by yourself, yeah, everything we are doing in the UI can be done with using the REST APIs.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? Yeah?
Thank you for your presentation. So I have a question about variable externalization.
Yep.
So when we automate deployments,
yep.
yes, I think that's the toughest thing. So how do you proceed to do that?
Yeah, so when you externalize variables using the variable registry I talked about, it's actually part of things stored in the NiFi registry. So in your development environment, let's say you externalize the Kafka brokers, just an example. So you will have a variable Kafka broker with a value. So you save this information into the NiFi registry, and when you will deploy the workflow for the first time into the production environment, the value associated to this variable will be the development one. Yeah. But using the CLI I talked about, you have the possibility to update the value associated to this variable. And once it's done for the first time, you don't have to do it anymore again, even if you are upgrading your workflow to another version. So if you are doing modifications, you don't need to apply again the modifications on your variables. So you just need to update the values of your variables when you are deploying the workflow for the first time.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But should we do that manually? I mean, variable by variable?
So again, using the CLI, there is an easy way to script all the variables update. If it's not clear, just check out my last post on my website. I'm going over this particular issue. But on the roadmap, the idea would be to actually ease this process because yeah, you have to update the variables. Exactly. So the idea we are thinking about, it's not clearly defined on the roadmap yet, but that's something we are talking in the community, is to provide also a central place in the NiFi registry that would allow you to actually define what is the value of a variable for each environment directly in the NiFi registry. But there is a lot of security issues around that, because if you are, I don't know, storing some passwords and so on, you don't want to have that going on the wire or something like that. So as I said, security with NiFi is something we are caring a lot about. So we need to think carefully about these kind of options. But that's definitely something we are looking into.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question? If you are shy, we can talk later if you want. In French? No? All good? Thank you.